Can a war film be so honest that powerful people would rather you never see it? These are not the clean, flag-waving battle stories America usually sells back to the world. They show panic, censorship, broken soldiers, ugly command decisions, and victories with blood still on them. Tonight, we're opening 15 British war films that were cut, buried, softened, or made uncomfortable enough to vanish from the easy version of history. Number 15, The Hill, 1965. Some war films show men breaking under enemy fire. The Hill shows men being broken by their own side. Set inside a British Army disciplinary camp in North Africa, this is not a battlefield movie in the usual sense. There are no heroic charges, no clean speeches, no patriotic music telling you how to feel. Instead, Sidney Lumet traps us inside a brutal military prison where punishment becomes performance, authority becomes cruelty, and discipline starts looking dangerously close to abuse. Sean Connery, stepping far away from the glamour of James Bond, plays a prisoner forced into a system designed to grind the human spirit down one step at a time. The infamous hill itself is simple, a man-made mound of sand under the burning sun, but the more soldiers are forced up and down it, the more it feels like a machine built to erase identity. That is why this film feels so dangerous. It does not attack the enemy, it questions the institution. And any war film that suggests the uniform can hide sadism is never going to be easy for official history to celebrate. Number 14. Night of the Generals, 1967. This is not the comfortable version of World War II where evil wears one face and heroism arrives cleanly dressed. Night of the Generals turns the war into a murder investigation, and that alone makes it feel colder, stranger, and more disturbing than a standard combat picture. The film follows a brutal killing that leads into the dark corridors of the German High Command, where power, madness, loyalty, and guilt all begin to blur. What makes it unsettling is not just the mystery. It is the way the film refuses to let military rank look noble by default. Generals are not shown as distant chess masters. They are men with private rot, political cowardice, and moral compromise hiding behind medals. By connecting personal violence with the larger machinery of fascism, the film asks a nasty question. How many crimes disappear when the criminal wears a respected uniform? That ambiguity made it harder to sell as simple wartime entertainment. It does not let viewers enjoy victory without looking at the systems that allowed horror to survive behind polished doors. Its punch is quiet, but poisonous. Number 13. Tunes of Glory, 1960. The most dangerous battlefield in Tunes of Glory is not a muddy trench or a bombed-out street. It is Pride. Set inside a Scottish regiment after the war, the film looks at military tradition as if it were both sacred and poisonous. Alec Guinness plays Major Jock Sinclair, a commander full of charm, swagger, and damage, while John Mills plays the more controlled officer who arrives to replace him. On paper, this sounds like a clash of personalities. In practice, it becomes a psychological war over class, honor, insecurity, and the myth of the perfect military man. The film is powerful because it does not need bullets to create violence. A dinner table becomes a battlefield. A parade ground becomes a courtroom. A uniform becomes a prison. For audiences expecting war cinema to glorify discipline and brotherhood, this story cuts in the opposite direction. It suggests that tradition can protect men, but it can also trap them until pride turns into self-destruction. Tunes of Glory is not anti-soldier, it is anti-worship, and that makes it sharper than many louder war films. Number 12. The Way Ahead, 1944. Before soldiers become legends, they are confused men standing in bad uniforms, waiting for someone to turn fear into training. The Way Ahead understands that uncomfortable truth better than most wartime films. Made while the Second World War was still raging, it follows ordinary British civilians as they are shaped into a fighting unit. The power of the film is in its restraint. It does not begin with perfect heroes. It begins with awkwardness, doubt, class friction, boredom, and men who do not yet know whether they have the courage expected of them. That honesty is what gives the film its bite. It was clearly designed to boost morale, but underneath the patriotic purpose is something more human. The idea that bravery is not automatic. It has to be built, tested, and sometimes dragged out of people who would rather be anywhere else. For a clean propaganda machine, that kind of realism is risky. The Way Ahead works because it respects ordinary men enough to show their weakness before their strength. That makes its final courage feel earned, not manufactured. Number 11. Went the Day Well, 1942. This film begins with the most terrifying idea imaginable during wartime. What if invasion did not arrive with sirens, but with friendly faces? Went the Day Well takes a peaceful English village and quietly turns it into a nightmare. German soldiers, disguised as British troops, slip into the community, and suddenly every familiar place becomes dangerous. A church, a cottage, a village lane, all the symbols of safety are transformed into possible traps. That is why the film still feels so sharp. It attacks the comforting belief that war happens somewhere else, to other people, on distant battlefields. Here, the enemy enters the home. Even more shocking, the film allows ordinary villagers, including women and older civilians, to become ruthless when survival demands it. Made in 1942 while Britain still feared invasion, this was more than entertainment. It was a warning wrapped in fiction. The message was simple but chilling. If war reaches your doorstep, politeness will not save you. Went the Day Well is patriotic, yes, but its patriotism has teeth, blood, and suspicion underneath.
Number 10. Private's Progress, 1956. Some war films salute the system. Private's Progress laughs in its face. This sharp British satire follows a young, inexperienced recruit pulled into the absurd machinery of military life, where incompetence, class privilege, dodgy authority, and bureaucratic nonsense seem almost as dangerous as the enemy. What makes the film so effective is that it does not attack soldiers on the ground. It attacks the smug structures above them. The officers, the paperwork, the social shortcuts, and the ridiculous rituals that can turn war into a playground for the well-connected. That is why its comedy has a sting. Beneath the jokes is a serious accusation. War does not always reward courage. Sometimes it rewards manipulation. In a culture that preferred noble sacrifice and stiff upper lip heroism, Private's Progress was awkward because it made the military look foolish, corruptible, and deeply human. It is not a battlefield epic, but it belongs on this list because satire can be more damaging than gunfire. A serious war film can be dismissed as grim. A funny one makes the powerful look ridiculous, and that is harder to forgive. Number 9. Dunkirk, 1958. Before Dunkirk became a modern survival spectacle, this British version treated the evacuation like a wound that had not fully healed. Dunkirk does not rush to turn retreat into triumph. It begins with confusion, bad planning, scattered soldiers, frightened civilians, and a nation suddenly forced to face how close disaster had come. That is what makes it feel more authentic than many cleaner war films. It understands that Dunkirk was not just a miracle of small boats. It was also a collapse, a scramble, and a humiliating escape from a catastrophe Britain barely survived. The film follows both soldiers trapped on the beaches and ordinary people back home who must decide whether courage means sailing into danger with almost no protection. Its power comes from the tension between national pride and national panic. The men are not polished action heroes. They are exhausted, dirty, uncertain, and sometimes angry. For audiences used to simple victory stories, this version is uncomfortable because it says survival can still look like defeat while it is happening. That is why Dunkirk belongs here. It does not erase heroism, but it strips away the shine around it. The film reminds us that some legends are born not from winning, but from refusing to disappear when everything has already gone wrong. Number 8. The Dam Busters, 1955. The Dam Busters looks heroic on the surface, but underneath the famous mission is a much colder story about risk, obsession, sacrifice, and the terrible cost of innovation. The film follows the planning of Operation Chastise, where British airmen trained to use bouncing bombs against German dams. A lesser movie would have turned the mission into a clean adventure about brilliant men and perfect courage. This one is more restrained. It spends time on testing, failure, pressure, doubt, and the grim knowledge that the pilots being celebrated may not come back. That is where its authenticity cuts through. The film shows war as engineering under pressure, not just bravery in the sky. Every calculation carries human consequences. Every successful test means someone else will eventually fly into darkness, low over water, under enemy fire, with almost no margin for error. The controversy around films like this is not always about banning. Sometimes it is about how later audiences are encouraged to remember them. America-friendly war storytelling often prefers victory without mess. The Dam Busters refuses to make the mission feel easy. It honors skill and courage, but it also leaves a shadow behind. Its punch is simple. The most celebrated operations can still be built on fear, flawed intelligence, and young men sent into the impossible. Number 7. Ice Cold and Alex, 1958. This is not a desert adventure. It is a slow psychological breakdown under a burning sun. Ice Cold and Alex follows a small group trying to cross the North African desert in an ambulance. But the real enemy is not only war, it is thirst, heat, suspicion, exhaustion, and the quiet collapse of manners when survival becomes personal. The film's brilliance is how small it feels. There are no massive armies sweeping across the screen. Instead, we are trapped with a handful of people who must keep moving while their bodies fail and their trust begins to crack. John Mills gives the story a raw emotional center as a man carrying fear, responsibility, and a desperate need to make it through alive. The famous promise of an ice-cold beer in Alexandria becomes more than a reward. It becomes a symbol of sanity, civilization, and the life they are trying not to lose. For viewers expecting clean battlefield heroics, this film is almost too human. The soldiers are brave, but they are also damaged, irritable, vulnerable, and morally strained. That is why Ice Cold and Alex still works. It does not glamorize endurance. It makes endurance look painful, sweaty, ugly, and sacred. By the end, survival feels less like victory and more like a confession. Number 6. A Town Like Alice, 1956. A Town Like Alice carries a kind of wartime suffering that mainstream adventure cinema often preferred to soften. Civilian endurance, female trauma, and captivity far away from the usual battlefield mythology. Based on Neville Shute's novel and inspired by real wartime experiences, the film follows Jean Paget and other women forced through a brutal ordeal during the Japanese occupation of Malaya. What makes it stand apart is that it does not center war only through soldiers, tanks, or generals. It asks what happens to civilians, especially women, when empire collapses and protection vanishes. The story is romantic in places, yes, but beneath that romance is something harsher. Hunger, humiliation, fear, disease, and the slow violence of being marched through a world that no longer recognizes your humanity. Virginia McKenna brings quiet strength to Jean, not as a flawless heroine, but as someone who survives because she has no other choice. The film's uncomfortable edge comes from its refusal to let wartime suffering remain masculine, glamorous, or purely military. It reminds viewers that history is full of people who never fired a weapon but still paid for the decisions of empires. A Town Like Alice belongs here because it widens the meaning of war. It says survival is not always loud. Sometimes it is a woman continuing to walk when the world expects her to break.
Number 5. The Cruel Sea, 1953. The Cruel Sea does not treat the ocean like scenery. It treats it like a graveyard with a heartbeat. This is one of the bleakest and most respected British naval war films because it understands that the Battle of the Atlantic was not glamorous. It was cold, repetitive, terrifying, and morally exhausting. The film follows the crew of a British escort ship protecting convoys from German U-boats, but its real subject is the emotional damage of command. Jack Hawkins plays a captain forced to make decisions no decent person should ever have to make, including moments where saving the mission may mean sacrificing men in the water. That is the kind of truth cleaner war stories usually hide. The enemy is dangerous, but so is duty. The sea swallows heroes and cowards with the same indifference. What makes the film unforgettable is its refusal to celebrate victory without guilt. Every depth charge, every rescue attempt, every tense silence in the fog carries the weight of men who may never come home. The Cruel Sea feels dangerous because it removes the romance from naval warfare. No shiny myth survives here for long. It is a film about courage, yes, but courage poisoned by memory. Its final impact is devastating. Sometimes war does not make men stronger. It leaves them alive and asks them to live with what survival cost. Number 4, Sink the Bismarck, 1960. This is not just a ship-hunting movie. It is a war room thriller where every calm voice hides panic. Sink the Bismarck follows the British hunt for Germany's most feared battleship, but what makes it gripping is how little it depends on empty spectacle. The tension comes from maps, radio signals, exhausted officers, and the terrifying knowledge that one steel monster could change the balance of the Atlantic. Instead of turning naval warfare into a clean adventure, the film shows the pressure of command, decisions made from incomplete information, men sent into danger by people who may never see the explosion, and victory measured in lives lost before the enemy finally sinks. That is why the film feels more authentic than many louder war stories. It respects strategy, intelligence, timing, and fear. The controversy around its American handling fits the larger pattern of this list. British war cinema often valued procedure and sacrifice, while U.S. marketing preferred speed, romance, and simple emotional hooks. But the film's power is in its discipline. It does not need to invent glory. The Bismarck itself is frightening enough. By the end, the triumph feels heavy, not cheerful, because the sea has taken too much from everyone. Number 3. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. Some classics become so famous that people forget how uncomfortable they were supposed to be. The Bridge on the River Kwai is often remembered as a grand adventure, but underneath its beautiful images and unforgettable whistle is a deeply disturbing argument about pride, obedience, and the madness of military honor. Alec Guinness plays Colonel Nicholson, a British officer imprisoned by the Japanese who becomes obsessed with building a bridge properly because he believes discipline must survive captivity. At first, that sounds noble, then it becomes horrifying. The film asks whether a man can be so loyal to rules, class, and military identity that he forgets what side of the war he is on. That is why British military figures objected to its portrayal. It did not simply show prisoners as heroic victims. It showed honor bending into delusion. William Holden's American character adds another layer, bringing cynicism and survival instinct against Nicholson's rigid idealism. The result is not clean propaganda. It is a psychological trap. The bridge becomes a symbol of achievement, collaboration, ego, and blindness all at once. Its final punch is brutal. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not cowardice, but pride dressed up as duty. Number 2. The Battle of the River Plate, 1956. This film turns naval warfare into a chess match with live ammunition. The Battle of the River Plate follows the hunt for the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee, but its real thrill is not just explosions at sea, it is patience. British war films at their best often understand that combat is not always chaos. Sometimes it is calculation, deception, waiting, and forcing the enemy to make the wrong move. That is exactly what this film captures. The commanders are not superheroes. They are professionals reading signals, studying damage, managing fear, and gambling with limited resources. The action matters, but the tactics matter more. That may be why the film feels so different from the more sensational style American distributors often favored. It does not reduce the Royal Navy's victory into pure spectacle. It shows the slow pressure of strategy, the loneliness of command, and the strange psychological battle that happens before the final shot is even fired. What makes it powerful is its restraint. The movie trusts viewers to understand that war is not only won by bigger guns, sometimes it is won by nerve. And in that sense, the Battle of the River Plate feels less like propaganda and more like a lesson in controlled courage. Number 1. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, 1943. Here is the film that proved a war movie could be patriotic and dangerous at the same time. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp does not attack Britain from the outside. It questions the myths Britain told itself from within. Made during the Second World War, it follows Clive Candy, an old-fashioned British officer whose ideas of honor, gentlemanly combat, and imperial confidence slowly become out of step with a darker modern world. That is what made the film so uncomfortable. It did not offer a simple flag-waving hero. It showed a decent man trapped inside outdated beliefs, while war itself became more ruthless, more political, and less noble. The film's sympathy toward a German character also made it controversial during wartime, when audiences were expected to think in clean lines of friend and enemy. Powerful people disliked it because it complicated morale. It suggested that winning a war was not enough if a country refused to examine the attitudes that shaped it. That is why Colonel Blimp belongs at number 1. It was not dangerous because it hated Britain. It was dangerous because it loved Britain enough to question its pride, its past, and its comforting version of heroism. These films were not dangerous because they invented lies. They were dangerous because they refused to polish the truth. They showed fear, failure, cruelty, pride, and survival without the heroic shine. Maybe that is why they were cut, ignored, or buried. The real question is simple. Which forgotten war film deserves to be remembered first by us tonight, right now?